The peanut butter cookie was the same as always. A little dry, a little sweet, the kind that comes individually wrapped in clear cellophane and tastes like it was made in a factory sometime last Tuesday. I have eaten one every second Tuesday for 18 months. I am not complaining. Free is free, and my mother raised me to accept what is offered without picking it apart. I was sitting in the recovery chair at the Memphis Community Blood Center on the second Tuesday of October, eating my cookie and reading the Memphis commercial appeal the way I do every month during the 15 minutes they make you sit before they let you go. The chair is a recliner, tan vinyl, the kind you see in dialysis centers and donation rooms all over the country, designed for a body that needs to be horizontal for a while. I always bring the newspaper from the rack in the lobby. I always read it back to front sports first, then local news, then national, then business last, because business is the section that takes the most patience, and I like to arrive at it when I'm already calm. I was in the business section when I saw her face. The article was below the fold. 3 columns. A headline I had to read twice before it settled. Federal lawsuit settled. Whitmore Pharma agrees to $47 million in drug pricing case. The photograph was Victoria Whitmore leaving a courthouse in Chicago. She was wearing a dark coat, and she had her hand raised slightly, not quite blocking the camera, but not quite welcoming it either. The expression on her face was the particular expression of a powerful person who has just done something expensive and has decided to frame it as a choice rather than a consequence. I have seen her face in newspapers for 3 years. I know it the way you know the face of someone who has never met you, but whose decisions reached all the way into your kitchen and changed the temperature of everything. I folded the newspaper. I finished my cookie. I sat in that recovery chair for the full 15 minutes, not because I needed to, but because I have learned that you don't rush the recovery time. You use it, and then I stood up, put on my coat, said goodbye to Priya at the front desk, and walked out to my car. I want to tell you something before I go any further. I need you to hear this part clearly, because everything that comes after depends on you understanding it. I am 67 years old. My name is Claudine Beaumont. I was an English teacher at Whitman High School in Memphis, Tennessee for 33 years, and I retired 4 years ago with a pension that I earned paper by paper, year by year, in classrooms that were always too hot in September and always too cold in January, with textbooks that were 10 years out of date, and students who deserved better than what the system gave them and usually got more anyway, because that is what happens when a teacher decides that the system's limits are not the same as the child's limits. I am telling you who I am, because what I am about to tell you is something I have not told anyone. Not my son Marcus, who lives in Atlanta and calls every Sunday at 6 and worries about me in the way that good sons worry about mothers who live alone. Not my pastor, not my neighbor Carol, who has been bringing me food on the first Thursday of every month since Harold died and who I love for it, even though I am perfectly capable of cooking my own food. Not even Priya, who has been watching me walk through that blood bank door for 18 months without missing a single visit, and who knows my blood type and my cookie preference, and the fact that I always read the newspaper back to front, but who does not know what I found out 3 weeks ago. What I found out is this. The blood I have been giving every single month for the past 18 months, the blood that left my arm in that donation chair and went through their processing system and came out the other side, matched and labeled and sent to a patient, has been going to the daughter of Victoria Whitmore, the daughter of the woman whose decision let my husband die. I know what you're thinking. I know it because I sat in my car in the parking lot of the blood center for 22 minutes after I saw that newspaper photograph, and I thought all of it myself. And then I drove home and thought it again at my kitchen table. How does that happen? How does the world arrange itself into that particular shape? I don't have an answer to that. I have given up expecting the world's arrangements to make a certain kind of sense. What I can do is tell you the story straight, from the beginning, and let you sit with it the way I have been sitting with it. But first, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I mean it. I want to know you're out there. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do it now because this is going to take a while and you're going to want to be here for the whole thing. My husband's name was Harold James Beaumont. He was 69 years old when he died, and he had been my husband for 34 years. And before that, he had been my friend for 3 years. And before that, he had been the man who sat behind me in Dr. Elmore's American Literature course at the University of Memphis in the fall of 1979, and who leaned forward on the second day of class to tell me very quietly that I had dropped my pencil. I had not dropped my pencil. I had set it down deliberately on the desk, but I picked it up and thanked him, and that was the beginning of everything. Harold worked for the United States Postal Service for 31 years. He was a carrier for the first 12 years and a supervisor for the last 19. And he loved the work the way some people love a calling, not because it was glamorous, because it was not, but because it connected him to people. And Harold was a man who needed to be connected to people the way some people need to be near water. He knew his customers by name. He remembered their birthdays. He knew which families had new babies and which houses had someone sick inside them. And he carried that information with the care of someone who understood that being trusted with people's ordinary lives is not an ordinary thing. He had a garden in the backyard of our house on Faxon Avenue, tomatoes in summer, collard greens in fall, and a row of marigolds along the fence that he replanted every year, not because they came back, but because he liked the planting. He said the thing about a garden is not the growing. The growing happens whether you're paying attention or not. The thing about a garden is the putting in, the deliberate act of it. Getting down on your knees and pressing something into the ground and saying, with your hands, I believe something will come from this. I tell you about Harold because you need to know him before I tell you what happened to him. You need to know the specific weight of what was lost before I tell you how it was lost, because the weight is the whole point. Harold was diagnosed with AIHA, autoimmune hemolytic anemia, in the spring of 4 years ago. It is a condition where the immune system mistakes the body's own red blood cells for foreign invaders and attacks them. It is manageable. The doctor who gave us the diagnosis was careful to use that word, manageable. There was a medication, Hemovax, that had been on the market for 12 years and had a solid track record with patients who responded well to it, which Harold did. His numbers stabilized within 3 months of starting treatment. The medication cost $400 a month. Our insurance covered 80%. Our out-of-pocket was $80 a month. That is a number we could work with. Whitmore Pharmaceuticals acquired the rights to Hemovax in March of that same year. By June, the new pricing had been announced, $16,000 per month. The press release called it a market correction. It said the new price reflected the true clinical value of the medication and would be accompanied by a patient assistance program for qualifying patients. We applied for the patient assistance program. We were told that Harold's Postal Service pension, $1,640 a month, disqualified us from the highest tier of assistance. We were offered a discount that brought the price to $4,200 a month, which is the kind of number that looks like help until you do the math. Our insurance had an annual cap of $10,000 for specialty medications. We hit it in August. By September, we were paying the full discounted amount out of pocket. I went back to tutoring. I had stopped when I retired, but I called the families I knew, and I had 4 students within a week. Marcus sent money every month from Atlanta. He did not make us ask for it. He simply transferred it on the first of every month and did not discuss it because he is Harold's son, and Harold would have done the same thing. None of it was enough. The math did not work. We knew the math did not work. We kept trying anyway because when the person you love needs something, you do not sit down and accept the math. You find another number to add to the column. Harold died on the 14th of February, 14 months after the price increase. He died at home, in the bedroom where we had slept for 23 years. In the early morning, before the light came all the way up, I was holding his hand. I had been holding it for most of the night. He was 69 years old. He had been planning to expand the garden that spring. He had seed catalogs on his nightstand, with pages folded down. I am going to pause here because I need to, and because I think you need to as well. 8 months after the funeral, I drove past the Memphis Community Blood Center on my way to the grocery store. I had driven past it 100 times in 30 years and never gone in. That morning, I pulled into the parking lot without fully deciding to. I sat in the car for a few minutes. Then I went inside, told the woman at the front desk that I wanted to donate, and filled out the paperwork. My blood type is AB negative. The nurse who took my information that first day looked up when she read it and said, "This is one of the rarest types we receive. Less than 1% of donors. You'll be very valuable to us if you come back regularly." I told her I would come back. I have come back every second Tuesday since. I did not do it to honor Harold. Exactly. I am careful about that word honor, because it can make a thing sound more finished than it is, more resolved, and grief is not resolved. Grief is something you learn to carry differently as time goes on, but it does not get smaller. What I did in that blood bank was not a ceremony. It was just the one thing I still had that no board of directors could put a price on. The one thing that moved from my body into the world with no paperwork and no cost and no conditions. I gave it freely. I gave it to strangers. I gave it every month for 18 months without knowing where it went. And then I sat in the recovery chair on the second Tuesday of October, eating a peanut butter cookie and reading a newspaper. And I saw Victoria Whitmore's photograph above a headline about a $47 million lawsuit settlement. I drove home. I put the newspaper on the kitchen table, open to that page. I sat down across from it. The afternoon light was coming through the window at the angle it comes through in October. Low and amber. The kind of light that makes everything look like it's being kept, rather than just seen. Harold's seed catalogs were still on the nightstand in the bedroom. I had not been able to move them. I looked at Victoria Whitmore's photograph for a long time. Harold's handwriting is still on the grocery list on the refrigerator. I have left it there for 3 years. It is not the original deteriorated after a while. The edges going soft from the humidity. The ink fading unevenly. So I scanned it on the printer in the spare bedroom and printed a copy and taped it to the same spot on the refrigerator door with the same kind of magnet, a small round one shaped like a Tennessee whiskey bottle that we bought at a gift shop in Nashville 20 years ago. The list reads: coffee filters, butter, lemons, oatmeal, the good kind. And at the bottom, in bigger letters, underlined once something for Claude. He always wrote that, not what the thing was, just something for Claude, because he was the kind of man who believed a grocery run should include something not on the list, something chosen with the person in mind, and he did not want to commit in writing because the choosing was the point. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after I came home from the blood bank on the second Tuesday of October. The newspaper was open in front of me. The October light had moved from amber to gray while I sat there, the way afternoon light does in this city when the clouds come in off the Mississippi. I did not turn on the lamp. I sat in the going dark, and I looked at Victoria Whitmore's photograph, and then I looked at Harold's grocery list on the refrigerator, and I thought about how two things can occupy the same kitchen at the same time: the thing that was taken and the thing that did the taking, and how the kitchen just holds them both without comment, because a kitchen does not get to have an opinion. I want to tell you about Harold properly. I mentioned him in the beginning, his hands, his garden, the American literature class where he handed me a pencil I had not dropped, but I told you the outline of him. I want to tell you the inside. Harold's voice was the kind that belonged in a room. Not loud, he was not a loud man, but settled. The kind of voice that made whatever room it was in feel occupied, in a good way. The way a fire makes a room feel occupied, even when everyone is reading and nobody is talking. When he laughed, which was often, it was the laugh of a man who found genuine things genuinely funny and did not perform amusement for social reasons. His laugh started slow and built. You could always tell when something had really gotten him, because he would have to set down whatever was in his hands first. He made the same breakfast every Saturday for 34 years. Grits with sharp cheddar, 2 eggs over medium, toast with butter that he applied, while the toast was still hot, so it absorbed rather than sat on top. He believed strongly in this distinction. He also believed that coffee should be made in a percolator rather than a drip machine, that NBA basketball was best watched with the sound low and the radio commentary on, and that a man who cannot identify at least 3 constellations has not paid sufficient attention to his own life. He knew 9. He taught me 6 of them. Standing in our backyard on clear summer nights, my back against his chest and his arm extended over my shoulder, his finger tracing the shape against the sky. These are the things that make up a person. Not the diagnosis, not the price of the medication, not the insurance paperwork or the monthly bank transfers, or the particular silence of a house after the hospice nurses have gone home for the last time. The person is the Saturday breakfast, and the grocery list, and the 9 constellations, and the laugh that required you to set down whatever you were holding. I have spent 3 years trying to hold both truths at once. The person Harold was, and the way he was taken. And I will tell you honestly that some days I manage it, and some days one truth crowds out the other, and I have to work to get the balance back. The AIHA diagnosis came on a Thursday in April. I know the day, not because I wrote it down, but because we had been planning to go to a concert that evening. The Memphis Symphony was doing an outdoor show at Overton Park, something Harold had been looking forward to for weeks. We went to the appointment in the morning expecting a thyroid result, and came out with a different piece of information entirely. We sat in the parking structure of the medical building for about 20 minutes before either of us said anything substantial. What Harold said finally was, "Well, I guess we're not going to that concert." I said, "Harold," he said, "I'm not being glib. I'm being practical. If we go to the concert, we're going to spend the whole time thinking about this conversation. So we should go home, let it land, and then figure out what to do. Tomorrow, we can look at the practical side. Tonight, we need to just be in it." That was Harold. Not avoiding, not performing strength, just managing the sequence correctly. We went home. We ordered delivery from the Thai place 3 blocks over that he liked. We watched a nature documentary about migratory birds, which was not something either of us had planned to watch, but which appeared on the television and turned out to be the right choice. We went to bed at 10:30. Harold fell asleep before I did, which is how it always was. He could sleep the way he did everything else, without unnecessary effort. I lay awake for a while. Then I did what I have always done when I need to think clearly. I went to the kitchen, made a cup of tea, and sat at the table. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that the practical side, which Harold had correctly identified as the next day's work, was manageable at first. Hemovax was $400 a month, and our insurance covered most of it, and Harold's numbers stabilized within 3 months of starting treatment. There was a real period, almost a year, where the diagnosis was a fact of our life but not a crisis. Harold gardened on weekends. He made his Saturday breakfast. He identified the constellations on clear nights. He wrote something for Claude on grocery lists. The crisis arrived with a press release. I will not spend too much time on the specific mechanics of what Whitmore Pharmaceuticals did, because I went through it in the beginning, and I do not want to put the same information in front of you twice. What I want to tell you is what it felt like from the inside. What it felt like to sit at this kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of insurance statements and arrive repeatedly at a number that did not work, no matter how many times you ran it. What it felt like to apply for a patient assistance program and receive a letter that used the word "unfortunately" 4 times in 3 paragraphs. What it felt like to call Marcus in Atlanta and hear him say, before I had finished explaining, "I'll set up a transfer. Don't argue with me." And to not argue, because he was right, and because arguing would have cost both of us something we needed to keep. What it felt like to tutor high school students in my living room on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Students not much different from the ones I had taught at Whitman. Bright kids trying to get their math scores up before the SAT. While Harold watched from the kitchen doorway with an expression I was not meant to see, The one that said he understood what I was doing and why, and could not make himself be grateful for the necessity of it. He never said anything about it directly. That was the hardest thing. He was a man who named things, who believed that you did not let the important things go unspoken, but this one he left alone. I think because saying it would have required him to say, "This is my fault, my body is the thing that broke the math," and that was a sentence he could not make himself put on me. I want to tell you about the last good day. It was a Sunday in November, about 5 months before he died. The weather had turned cold enough for a fire, and Harold had built one in the fireplace, real wood, not the compressed logs, because he said the compressed logs smelled like something was pretending to be a fire, rather than actually being one. We had eaten dinner. Marcus had called at 6. Harold had talked to him for 40 minutes, which was longer than usual, and from the kitchen where I was washing dishes, I could hear them laughing about something I couldn't quite make out. After the call, Harold came into the kitchen and stood beside me at the sink. He did not help with the dishes, which was not his job. We had divided the kitchen tasks in 1991, and the arrangement had held. He just stood there. After a while, he said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, "What?" He said, "That first day, the American literature class. You hadn't dropped that pencil." I said, "I know I hadn't." He said, "I knew you knew. I was hoping you'd be too polite to say so." I kept washing the dish in my hands. He stayed where he was. The fire was going in the other room, and the kitchen smelled like the dinner we had made, and the dishwater, and the specific smell of our house, which is the smell of 30 years of two people living inside the same walls, which is a smell that does not have a name, but that I have understood since he died, is one of the things that grief takes without asking. Harold died on the 14th of February, as I told you. That morning, I called Marcus, and I called the hospice, and I called our pastor, and I made a list of everything that needed to happen next, because the list is what I know how to do. I am a woman who makes lists. I made the list and I worked through it, and people came to the house, and then left, and then came again, and eventually it was just me. The morning after the funeral, Marcus flew back to Atlanta. He had stayed 4 days. He offered to stay longer, and I told him to go, because he needed his life, and I needed to learn to be inside mine alone. The house was very quiet. I went into the backyard that first morning and stood in the garden. It was February, and everything was dormant, and the beds looked like nothing, just dark soil and last year's dead stems. The marigolds along the fence were gone, they don't winter over. He'd always replanted them from seed in April. The tomato cages were still standing, empty. I stood there in the cold for a while. I am not sure what I was looking for. Something that was already gone, most likely. 8 months later, on a Wednesday morning in October, I was driving to the grocery store on Poplar Avenue, the Kroger. On the east side, the one we had always used, and I passed the Memphis Community Blood Center on the right side of the road. I had driven past it dozens of times. It is a low brick building with a small parking lot and a sign with a red drop on it that I had looked at without seeing for years. That morning, I put on my turn signal. I pulled in. I parked in the third spot from the left, near the elm tree, which had most of its leaves still. I sat in the car for a few minutes. I was not sure what I was doing there. I had not planned it. I had a grocery list in my purse, my own handwriting, not Harold's, which still looked wrong to me. The list still looked wrong without his, and the Kroger was 2 more blocks east, and there was no logical reason to be in this parking lot. But I turned off the engine, I picked up my purse, and I walked through the front door of the Memphis Community Blood Center with nothing in my hands and no appointment and no plan. She asked if I had been in before. I said no. This was my first time. She smiled and handed me the clipboard. She said, "Welcome. We're glad you came in." I sat down in the plastic chair in the waiting area and began filling out the paperwork. My hands were steady. My handwriting was the same as it had always been, the cursive I'd been using since 3rd grade, the kind my students had called old-fashioned, which I took as a compliment. For the first time in 8 months, I felt like I was doing something with my hands that was the right use of them. The second visit was harder than the first. The first visit I did not plan, and so I did not have to talk myself into it. I just drove past and turned in, and the decision was made before I understood I was making it. The second visit was deliberate. I had to get in the car on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks later and drive down Poplar Avenue and turn into that parking lot on purpose, with full knowledge of what I was doing and why, and that is a different kind of thing entirely. I almost didn't go. I sat in my kitchen at 8:45 inches the morning with my coat on and my purse on the table, and I thought, you don't have to. It was true. Nobody was expecting me. Priya did not yet know my name. The front desk would not notice my absence. I could take off my coat and make another cup of coffee and spend the morning doing something useful around the house, and the world would continue without interruption. I went, not because I had convinced myself of anything, but because I was already wearing the coat. By the fourth visit, Priya knew my name. Not because I had introduced myself formally, she had it from the intake form, she had it from the computer, but because she used it when I came in, and there is a difference between having someone's name in a system and choosing to use it. She said, "Good morning, Mrs. Beaumont," when I pushed through the door, and she said it the way a person says good morning to someone they are genuinely glad to see, and I was surprised to find that this mattered to me more than I expected. By the sixth visit, she knew my cookie preference. She started saving the peanut butter ones before I arrived, setting one aside in the morning when she stocked the recovery area. She did not make a production of it. She just handed it to me with the juice when I settled into the chair, and we did not discuss it. I want to tell you about what those visits did for me, because I think people imagine that grief has a shape, a trajectory that goes from worse to better, from heavy to light, from the acute pain of the first months to something more manageable as time passes. And that is partially true. But what it leaves out is that grief does not move in only one direction, and it does not keep a schedule, and there are mornings 14 months after the loss. When you reach into the cabinet for a mug and find one of his, the blue ceramic one he used every morning, the one you moved to the back of the shelf, because looking at it was too much and throwing it away was unthinkable, and the morning reorganizes itself entirely around that mug, and whatever you had planned to do before 10 o'clock becomes irrelevant. What the blood bank gave me was a Tuesday that had a specific purpose from the moment I woke up, a reason to put on my coat, a chair that expected me, a woman who saved me the right cookie. I am not describing this as healing, I am describing it as structure, which is a different thing, and which mattered to me for reasons I understand now better than I did then. The elm tree in the parking lot was one of the things I tracked without meaning to. In October, it still had most of its leaves when I first pulled in. By December, they were gone entirely, and the branches were bare and dark against the winter sky. In March, the first buds appeared small and tentative, the way things begin when they're not sure yet if conditions are right. By April, the tree was fully leafed and the parking lot was cooler in the shade of it, and I had been coming for 6 months, and the routine had become what it was going to be. Second Tuesday of every month. I set an alarm on my phone the evening before blood bank, 9 a.m., not because I would have forgotten, but because seeing it written down made it feel like an appointment kept rather than a habit maintained. Harold had always said there was a dignity in keeping appointments. He wrote his in a paper calendar, the kind with a week on each page, and he kept it on his nightstand and reviewed it every Sunday evening. I had thought this was unnecessary in the age of digital calendars. I understood it better now. It was on the 4th month that Priya mentioned the pediatric patient. She said it the way she said most things. During the draw, conversational, unhurried, her hands busy with the equipment while her attention was available for whatever the room needed. She had been checking the needle placement, and she said, without looking up, "I want you to know that your blood type is not something we take lightly. AB negative is it moves fast through our system. There's rarely a surplus." I said I was glad it was useful. She said, "Right now, there's a pediatric patient being seen at St. Jude's who has a standing order with us. Regular AB negative transfusions, ongoing. Your donations have been going there." I looked at the bag filling beside my arm. A child, I said. Yes. I thought about that for a moment, not with sentiment. I was not the sentimental kind, and Harold had not been either. And 34 years had confirmed that we were right to keep sentiment in its proper place. I thought about it practically, the way I thought about most things. The blood left my arm, went through a process I would never see, and arrived somewhere that needed it. A child. At Street, Jude's, where the children went when the situation was serious enough for Street Jude's. I don't need to know more than that, I said. Priya nodded. She labeled the bag and placed it in the cooler. The conversation moved on. I ate my cookie and drank my juice and read my newspaper for 15 minutes and drove home. I chose not to know more on purpose, and I want to be precise about why, because it matters for what comes later. The system is anonymous for a reason. The anonymity is not bureaucratic inconvenience, it is protection. Protection for the donor, who cannot become attached to a specific outcome. Protection for the recipient, who cannot become obligated to a specific person. The gift is cleaner without an address. I had understood this from the beginning. From the first time I sat in that intake chair and read through the paperwork about donor confidentiality and how the blood moved through the system. I had agreed to those terms not because I was required to, but because I believed in them. I kept believing in them until a Tuesday morning in April. It was the 9th month. The elm tree was in full leaf. I arrived at 9:07, which was slightly later than usual because the traffic on Poplar had been heavier than the construction schedule suggested it should be. Priya waved me in from behind the desk, and I signed the clipboard and went to the waiting area to sit until my name was called. There were 4 other people in the waiting area, 2 older men reading their phones, a young woman in scrubs who appeared to be trying to sleep sitting up, and a woman who had come in just ahead of me, who sat down 2 chairs to my left and immediately pressed her phone to her ear and continued a conversation that had clearly been in progress before she pushed through the door. I did not look at her. I found my place in the newspaper. I had been in the middle of a piece about the Memphis City Council's infrastructure budget when I'd folded it. Coming in, and I read. The woman on the phone did not lower her voice. Not because she was inconsiderate exactly. It was more that she was the kind of person who had spent enough years in spaces where her voice was the most important one in the room that she no longer registered the volume of it in relation to other people. I recognized this. I had had students like this, bright, capable, accustomed to being right, who were not rude so much as they were unaware that their awareness ended at their own skin. I heard, the transfusion schedule is holding. Priya confirmed, the standing order is still active, so we have consistency going forward. Lily's numbers from Monday were the best they've been in 4 months. I turned a page of the newspaper. Yes, the Memphis Center has been the most reliable match. I need you to make sure the Street Jude team is aligned with Dr. Brennan's protocol before Friday. She was talking about the child. I understood this before I had made any other conscious determination. She was talking about the child at Street Jude's with the standing order for AB-negative blood. And she was doing it in a waiting room at the Memphis Community Blood Center on a Tuesday morning, which meant she was either here for herself or here because of the child, and from the way she was talking, it was the second one. I turned another page. I read a sentence 3 times without absorbing it. I looked up. She was in profile. Dark coat, well cut. The kind of posture that is partly good breeding and partly the result of never having been able to afford to look uncertain. Dark hair, shoulder length, the kind of controlled that takes effort to maintain. She was 40-something, or had the compressed energy of someone that age. Her free hand was in her lap, fingers pressed flat against her knee in the way people press things against surfaces when they need something to stay still. I recognized her face the way you recognize something that you have been seeing in newspapers for long enough that it has become part of your internal catalog without your permission. Victoria Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. The woman whose photograph I had folded inside the Memphis Commercial Appeal 11 months ago and carried home in my purse without fully understanding why. The woman whose face I had seen above the Hemovax pricing announcement. above the patient advocacy lawsuit coverage, above the quarterly earnings reports that showed the profit margin on the medication that Harold could not afford in the last year of his life. She was sitting 2 chairs to my left, talking on her phone about Lily's numbers, in the waiting room of the blood bank where my AB negative blood had been going every month for 9 months. I did not move. I did not look away quickly, which would have been a signal, and I did not continue staring, which would have been a different kind of signal. I looked at my newspaper. I turned a page. The page was about property tax assessments in Shelby County. I read it with complete attention, which required nothing from me because I retained nothing. When my name was called, I stood up, folded the paper, and walked to the donation area. I sat in the chair. I rolled up my sleeve. Priya tied the rubber band around my arm and pressed 2 fingers along the inside of my elbow, finding the vein with the ease of someone who had done this on this particular arm 9 times before. "How's the traffic today?" she asked. "Construction on Poplar," I said. "The right lane is closed past the Walgreens." "Every single week," she said. "You'd think they'd be done by now." The needle went in. My blood moved into the bag. I held the small foam cylinder they give you, and I squeezed it at the rhythm they recommend, steady and even, and I watched the bag fill the way I had watched it fill 9 times, before dark and warm and without hurry, the same as always. My hands were steady. I was grateful for that. When I left an hour later, the waiting room was empty. Victoria Whitmore was gone. I walked to my car and sat for a moment, with both hands on the steering wheel, engine off, looking at the elm tree in front of me. A bird was in it, a single one, small, brown. Doing whatever small brown birds do in elm trees in April in Memphis, which appeared to be nothing in particular, and also exactly the right thing. I drove home. I put the kettle on. I stood at the kitchen counter and waited for the water to boil. And I thought about the 9 months of donations that had preceded this morning, and I thought about the woman on the phone, and I thought about the child named Lily, whose numbers from Monday had been the best in 4 months. I made my tea. I carried it to the table. I sat in the chair I always sit in, the one facing the window, and I looked at Harold's grocery list on the refrigerator. Something for Claude, underlined once. And I asked myself, in the particular internal voice I use when I need an honest answer and not a comfortable one, what I was going to do now. The kettle had gone quiet. Outside, the April light was still good. On the 2nd Tuesday of May, I would either go back or I would not. I picked up my phone. I opened the calendar. I found the 2nd Tuesday of May, and I typed in blood bank, 9 a.m. Then I set the phone face down on the table and drank my tea. Harold's tomatoes came up in May without being asked. I had not planted them. I had not done anything to the garden since the February morning after the funeral, when I stood in it and looked at the dormant beds and went back inside. But April had brought rain, and the soil had done what soil does when it has been tended for 20 years, it remembered. The volunteer tomatoes came up along the south fence, where Harold had grown them every summer, small and insistent, more of them than I could reasonably use. I was on my knees in the garden pulling weeds around them when I understood what I was going to do. I had been living with the knowledge for 3 weeks. By then, the knowledge of whose daughter was receiving my blood, the knowledge of who Victoria Whitmore was and what she had authorized, and what that authorization had cost. I had been living with it the way you live, with a piece of furniture that doesn't fit the room. You move around it, you adjust your path, you stop seeing it as a problem to be solved and start seeing it as a fact to be accommodated. But it was always there. I walked around it every morning when I made my coffee, and every evening when I turned off the kitchen light. The question I kept arriving at was not, should I stop? I had already decided I wasn't going to stop, or rather, I had set the alarm on my phone for the 2nd Tuesday of May, and that was its own kind of decision. The question was, why not? What was the actual reason? I needed to know the reason clearly, stated in plain language, the way I had always required my students to state their reasons. Not, "I feel like it." Not, "It's the right thing." The actual reason, underneath the feeling. I was on my knees pulling weeds when I heard Harold's voice. Not literally, I want to be careful about that. Harold is gone, and I know he is gone. But there are things he said that are so thoroughly part of me now that I can hear them in his register, with his particular timing, as clearly as if he'd said them this morning. This was something he said to me 20 years ago, when I was in the second year of a difficult stretch with a student who had done nothing to make me want to help him and who needed help anyway. Harold had watched me struggle with the decision for a week before he said, at the dinner table, without preamble, "Claude, you don't do good things because the other person deserves them. You do good things because you deserve to be someone who does good things." He went back to his dinner. He did not elaborate. He had learned over decades of marriage that I processed better in silence than in discussion. And he gave me the sentence and left it alone. I had thought about it for 20 years. I thought about it now, on my knees in the May garden with soil on my hands, and for the first time I understood it not as encouragement, but as instruction. It was not telling me to be generous. It was telling me what generosity actually was, and where it actually lived. Not in the deserving of the recipient, in the integrity of the giver. Victoria Whitmore's daughter did not deserve my blood more than anyone else's child. She did not deserve it less. Either she was 8 years old, and she had not made any decisions about drug pricing, and she was sick in the way that children are sick, without cause or fairness. But the deserving was beside the point. The point was what I was going to be, month after month, in that donation chair. The point was whether I was going to let Victoria Whitmore's decisions determine mine. I pulled another weed, a determined one, deep-rooted, the kind that requires 2 hands and patience. I dropped it in the bag beside me. I went back on the second Tuesday of May, and the Tuesday after that, and the one after that. I am not going to tell you it was easy, because this story does not benefit from me softening the difficult parts. Some months I sat in that parking lot for 5 minutes before going in. Some months I went in quickly, before I could think too carefully. What I can tell you is that I went. Every second Tuesday, I went. Victoria was not always in the waiting room. Some months, the chairs held only strangers. Other donors, people waiting for results, the occasional family member of a patient from the pediatric floor, identifiable by the particular fatigue of someone who has been managing fear for longer than fear was supposed to last. When Victoria was absent, I found that I noticed her absence the same way I noticed her presence as information, as something to register and file. When she was there, I observed her over the months the way I had observed difficult students, carefully, without judgment, with the specific attention of someone trying to understand rather than evaluate. She was always on her phone when she arrived, and for most of the time she sat there. She had 2 modes in the waiting room. Active management. The phone calls. The emails scrolled with a kind of compressed urgency. And a third mode that appeared between the other 2, a few seconds, sometimes longer, when the phone was in her lap and her face was unmanaged, and she looked like someone who had been running for a very long time and was not permitted to stop. I recognized that expression. I had worn it myself. She never looked at the other people in the waiting room. Not dismissively, I want to be accurate about this, but as someone who has learned to operate in a very narrow field of focus and has stopped seeing anything outside it. She came for Lily. She sat for Lily. She left for Lily. The rest of the room was peripheral, and I was in the rest of the room, and that was fine. Then came a Thursday morning in July. I need to tell you about this morning carefully because it is the one that reorganized everything. I had switched to a Thursday that month because a plumber was coming on the second Tuesday, and I had rescheduled with the blood center the week before. Priya had accommodated the change without comment. The Thursday waiting room was less full than usual summer, people on vacation. The rhythms of a Tuesday crowd versus a Thursday one entirely different. I was one of 4 people in the chairs when the door opened. Victoria Whitmore came in first. then a child. She was small for her age. I would later learn she was 8, but she read younger, partly because of the illness, and partly because she had the quality some sick children have of being simultaneously very young and very old, as if the body's difficulty has burned away the middle and left only the essential self. Her hair was growing back in unevenly, patches of new growth beside patches where the treatment had taken its toll. She was wearing a yellow jacket, bright, deliberate yellow, the kind a child chooses, specifically because it is yellow. Because yellow means something to a child that it stops, meaning when you grow up and start choosing things for their utility. She had a sketchbook under her arm, the spiral-bound kind, the large one with a blue cover. She sat down, not beside Victoria, but one chair away from her, the way children sit when they want some independence, but not complete separation. She opened the sketchbook, and she began to draw immediately, with the focus of someone who has been thinking about what they're going to draw for the whole car ride over, and is now simply executing the plan. I was watching from across the room. I was not subtle about it. When you have spent 33 years watching children think, you develop the ability to observe without making the subject feel observed. And I use that now without deciding to. She drew for several minutes. Then she looked up. Children look up the way cats look up directly, without social calculation, without the managed eye contact of adults who have learned to modulate their gaze. She looked at me, not at the room, at me. She smiled. It was a full smile, unguarded, the smile of a child who has not yet learned that strangers require assessment before warmth. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. I smiled back. I did not trust my voice to do anything else, so I did not try. I kept the smile for the same 2 seconds she had given me, and then I looked back at my newspaper and I breathed. Steadily. The way I breathe. When steadiness requires effort. Victoria, beside her, had not looked up from her phone. 3 weeks after that Thursday, Priya found me in the recovery chair during the 15-minute wait and sat down in the chair beside me. Not the chair she usually occupied when she checked on donors, the one at the workstation, the one next to me. She had her clipboard, but she wasn't consulting it. She sat for a moment before she spoke. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Not medically, just something." I folded the newspaper. I looked at her. "The little girl," Priya said. "Lily. Her situation has changed." I waited. The transfusions are doing what they're supposed to do, stabilizing her counts, buying time. But the underlying disease is progressing. There's a treatment protocol that's been effective in trials, a combination approach that her doctor has been pushing for. But it's not covered by standard insurance. "How much?" I asked. Because I have always believed in asking the specific number rather than waiting to be told. Priya looked at her clipboard, though I did not think she needed to. "Approximately $2 million. Out of pocket." I sat with that number. $2 million was not a number that would stop Victoria Whitmore. $2 million was not the obstacle. And yet the child was still receiving monthly transfusions rather than the treatment that would address the disease directly, which meant something was slowing the process. Insurance approval. Clinical trial enrollment. The particular machinery of large medical decisions that move slowly, regardless of the wealth of the people involved. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked. Priya was quiet for a moment. "That's not something I can tell you," which was its own kind of answer. I drove home through the August heat, the city outside the windows, looking bleached, and still the way Memphis looks in August when the humidity has taken over completely. I parked in front of the house on Faxon Avenue. I sat for a moment. Then I went inside, past the kitchen, down the hall to the bedroom. Harold's side of the bed was the same as it had always been. His nightstand still held what it had always held: the lamp, the small clock, the water glass I replaced, weekly, out of habit rather than necessity. And his Bible, which he had kept beside the clock since his mother gave it to him when he left for college, and which he read not daily but regularly, the way he did everything that mattered to him. I had not opened it since before he died. I had not been ready. I sat on his side of the bed. I picked up the Bible. It fell open, the way well-used books open to the place most visited, the spine most bent. The page was in Proverbs. Harold had underlined verse 25 inches pencil, the light, careful underline of a man who respected the book too much to press hard. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. I sat there for a long time. The room was quiet. The August light came through the curtains at an angle that made the dust in the air visible, small particles moving slowly, without urgency, in no particular direction. Then I said out loud to the room and to whatever was in it, and to Harold, who was not there but was also not entirely absent, "Tell me what I'm supposed to do with all of this." The room did not answer. Rooms do not answer. But I sat there a while longer anyway, with the Bible open in my lap and the underlined verse in front of me. And slowly, the way decisions form when they have been building for long enough, something began to take shape. I kept the laptop closed for 2 days. It sat on the kitchen table where I had left it after I came downstairs from Harold's side of the bed, the screen dark, the charger cord looped beside it. I made coffee in the mornings, and I sat at the table and I looked at it and I did not open it. Not because I was afraid of what I would find. I already knew, in the broad strokes, what I would find. I had been reading newspaper coverage of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals for 3 years. I was not going to discover anything that surprised me. What I was doing was being honest about what the search meant. Opening that laptop and typing Victoria Whitmore's name into a court records database was not the same as sitting in the waiting room and watching her from across the room. It was something more deliberate, more adversarial maybe. And I needed 2 days to be sure that adversarial was what I actually intended, and not just what grief was recommending. On the third evening, a Wednesday, I made a cup of tea, and I sat down, and I opened the laptop. I spent the first hour on news coverage, not the general coverage I already knew, but the specific, every article published in the 12-month window, surrounding the Hemavax price increase, organized chronologically, read in sequence. What you find when you do this is not the story any single article tells, but the story that emerges from the gaps between them. The announcement, the initial response, the patient advocacy community's reaction, which was immediate and documented, and largely ignored. The first lawsuit filed 4 months after the announcement. The second lawsuit, joined by 17 states. The settlement negotiations. The $47 million figure that I had seen in the newspaper at the blood bank, which sounds like accountability until you learn that Whitmore Pharmaceuticals posted $2.3 billion in revenue the quarter the settlement was announced. I spent the second hour in the federal court filing system. This requires patience and a specific kind of attention, the kind that can hold a large amount of information in the mind simultaneously, and look for patterns rather than individual facts. I had spent 33 years teaching students to read this way. I was good at it. What I found in those filings, 47 documented cases of patients who experienced serious medical deterioration or death in the 18-month period following the price increase, where medical records and insurance documentation established a direct connection between inability to afford the medication and worsening condition. 47. I wrote the number on the notepad beside my laptop and looked at it. Harold's name was not among them. I had not filed anything formally. We had not known, in the last months, that there was anything to file, that the timeline of the price increase and the timeline of his decline were something a court would be interested in. I had not thought in those terms. I had been thinking in the terms of finding the money and then of being present, and then of managing the list of things that needed managing after he was gone. The legal dimension had not been a room I entered. His name was not on the document. His name was on a grocery list on my refrigerator. These were both true at the same time. I spent the third hour in public financial and corporate records, which is where I found the thing that changed the shape of everything I thought I already understood. A shareholder meeting transcript, published in compliance with SEC disclosure requirements, dated 14 months before the Hemavax pricing announcement. Routine governance material, the kind of document that is public because it is required to be public and is read by almost nobody because it is dense and long and rewards only the reader who already knows what they're looking. 4. Board discussion of a proposed acquisition. Hemavax was on the agenda. The discussion was recorded in summary rather than verbatim, but the summaries were specific enough. A board member named Ellison Greer had argued against the full pricing structure. He had proposed an alternative, a maximum price of $4,000 per month, still 10 times the original cost, still a significant profit margin combined with a patient assistance program that would cap out-of-pocket costs at $150 monthly for patients meeting income thresholds. He had presented data. He had made the argument for 3 paragraphs of board minutes. Victoria Whitmore had overruled him. The vote was 7-2. The transcript was dated the same month, the same calendar month, not the same quarter, the same month that Lily had been first diagnosed with AIHA. I closed the laptop. I put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. They were the same hands that had graded 33 years of student essays, that had held Harold's hand through the last night, that had rolled up a sleeve every second Tuesday for 18 months in a donation chair 5 miles from where I was sitting. The same hands. I went to the desk in the spare bedroom. I found a legal pad and a pen. I sat at the desk and I wrote a letter to Victoria Whitmore. 3 pages. Front side only, my handwriting the same cursive it had always been. The letters pressed with the consistent pressure of someone who has written carefully for a very long time. I did not threaten. I did not demand. I laid out the facts of Harold's case. The diagnosis, the price before and after, the insurance cap, the patient assistance denial, the specific financial trajectory of our last 14 months together, the date he died. I documented these facts the way I had documented everything, with dates and numbers and no editorial language beyond what the facts themselves conveyed. At the bottom of the 3rd page, I wrote one question. Was this the outcome you anticipated? I signed it. I folded it in thirds. I held it for a moment. Then I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, where I kept the things I had not been ready to decide about Harold's Postal Service ID, which I could not throw away and did not know what to do with. A birthday card he had given me 4 years ago, that I had kept because of what he wrote inside it. And his watch, the one he had worn every day for 22 years, a Seiko with a brown leather band that he had replaced twice over that time because he liked the watch and saw no reason to change it. The watch was stopped. I had not wounded it since he died, and I did not intend to. I put the letter in the drawer with the watch. I closed the drawer. I did not send the letter. I want to be clear about why. Not because I was afraid, and not because I had softened. I did not send it because the question it asked was one I already knew the answer to. And sending it would have made the letter about her response rather than about my clarity. I had written it to understand my own mind. I understood it. That was what the letter was for. The following month, 2nd Tuesday of September, I arrived at the Memphis Community Blood Center at 9:08 and pushed through the front door and stopped. There was a man at the desk I had not seen before, mid-40s, business clothes, not a suit exactly, but the blazer and slacks combination that says, "I work in an office, and this is my version of casual." He was talking to Priya, and Priya's posture had the particular uprightness of someone who is being professionally accommodating while also being professionally careful. He had a notepad. He was writing something. I heard. Regular donor. She would have been here for at least a year. AB. Negative. So she'd stand out in your system. I was told she usually comes with a newspaper. Priya said something I couldn't catch. Her voice was lower than his. He wrote something else on the notepad. I stood just inside the door for approximately 4 seconds, long enough to understand what I was hearing, short enough that neither of them had registered my arrival. I picked up my coat from my arm, where I had been carrying it. I turned around. I pushed back through the door. I walked to my car in the parking lot, got in, put my hands on the wheel, and drove home. I did not speed. I did not take a wrong turn. I drove the route I had driven dozens of times. Poplar Avenue to the left turn on Barksdale, up through the neighborhood to Faxon, into the driveway. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the normal quiet of a Tuesday morning in front of my house. I thought, she is looking for me. She has sent someone to find me. I thought, she is going to find me. The description is specific enough. I thought, the only question is what happens when she does. These 3 thoughts arrived in that sequence, and I sat with each of them, and I did not feel what I expected to feel, which was fear. What I felt was something more like the sensation of a conclusion being reached, the particular internal settling that happens when a long calculation finally resolves into a number. The number was not comfortable, but it was clear. I went inside. I made dinner, nothing elaborate. A chicken I had thawed the day before, roasted with lemon and garlic the way I had always made it, the way Harold had always said, was the only acceptable way to make a roast chicken. I ate at the kitchen table with the radio on, which I had begun doing after Harold died, because the silence of a dinner alone is a different kind of silence than other silences, and the radio helps. After dinner, I called Marcus. He picked up on the 2nd ring, which meant he was home. When he picks up on the 4th or 5th, it means he's still at the office. And the conversation has a different quality. Hey, Mama. Hey, baby. How was your day? We talked for 20 minutes. Not about anything I have told you in this story. About his work, which he was finding challenging in the way that challenging work is satisfying when you are the kind of person who needs to be challenged. About a restaurant he had tried that week. About the weather, which in Atlanta in September is still summer in everything but name. I listened to his voice. The way I had listened to Harold's voice. The way I listened to anything that matters. Not for content only, but for the sound of it. The specific frequency of someone you have known long enough that their voice is part of how you understand that you are still here. We said goodnight. I washed the dinner dishes. I turned off the kitchen light. Standing in the darkened kitchen, I thought about Harold. Not the Harold of the last months, the one the illness had made smaller, but the one before. The one who made Saturday breakfast and read the paper calendar every Sunday and replanted the marigolds every April. Not because he had to, but because he believed in the deliberate act of putting something in the ground. The one who said, 20 years ago, at a dinner table, a sentence I had been living inside ever since. And I thought, whatever happens when she finds me, I already made the right choice 18 times. Whatever comes next is just the consequence of being someone who does right things. And that consequence is mine to stand in. I went upstairs. I slept. The following 2nd Tuesday, I drove to the Memphis Community Blood Center at 9 o'clock in the morning and parked in my usual spot and went inside and donated my blood and ate my cookie and read my newspaper and drove home. Nobody was at the front desk asking questions about me. Nobody was in the parking lot. The Tuesday after that was the same. The Tuesday after that, I walked out to my car after my donation, and Victoria Whitmore was standing beside it. She was standing on the passenger side of my car, not the driver's side. I noticed this before. I noticed anything else. Not her face, not her expression, but the specific choice of which side of the vehicle to stand on, which told me she had thought about the geometry of this in advance. Driver's side would have been blocking, aggressive, even if unintentionally. Passenger side was less confrontational. It said, I am here, but I am leaving you room. It was November. The kind of Memphis November morning that cannot decide whether it is still fall or has already become winter overcast. Cold enough for a coat, not cold enough that you need the heavy one, which means you're always slightly underdressed. The parking lot was half full. The elm tree had lost everything by now. Its branches were bare and precise against the gray sky. The way bare trees are always more architectural than you remember when the leaves are on. Victoria Whitmore was wearing gray, a different coat from the dark one I had seen in the waiting room. Lighter weight, more practical, as if she had dressed this morning for a task rather than for an office. She had her phone in her hand, but the screen was dark. Both of these things registered. She saw me, see her. She did not move toward me. She let me cover the distance between the door and my car at my own pace, which I did at the same pace I do everything without hurry and without the kind of slowness that announces itself. When I reached the car, I stopped. We were separated by the hood. "Mrs. Beaumont," she said. I waited. I know you didn't ask for this," she said. "I want to be careful about that. I'm not here to pressure you or to make this into something it isn't." She stopped, recalibrated. The way people recalibrate when they have prepared a version of a sentence and it sounds wrong when spoken out loud. "I found out it was you about 3 weeks ago. I wanted to say thank you." The thank you was real. I want to give her that. It was not performative. She was not a performative woman. I had understood that from watching her, she was too tightly wound for performance. But it had the quality of a sentence that had been constructed in advance and was now being delivered, and delivery is never quite the same as conversation. I said, "You're welcome." She looked slightly startled. I think she had expected something else. First, resistance, or questions, or the kind of guarded silence that invites elaboration. I gave her none of those things, because "you're welcome" is the correct response to a genuine thank you, and I was raised to give correct responses. She reached into the coat pocket, the left one, and took out an envelope. She held it out across the hood of my car. "I'd like to. I want to do something for you, to recognize what you've done." I looked at the envelope. It was thick, the kind of thick that announces a check rather than a letter. "No," I said. She kept her arm extended for a moment. Then she withdrew it. "I understand that. But please hear me. It's not a transaction. I'm not trying to—" "I understand what you're trying to do," I said. "And I understand that you mean it sincerely. The answer is still no." She put the envelope back in her pocket. She pressed her lips together briefly. And in that gesture, I saw the thing that money does to people who have had it for long enough. It becomes the vocabulary for all sentiment, including the sentiments that money cannot actually express. She had reached for the only language she was certain of, and I had declined it, and now she had to find a different one. "Then I don't understand," she said. "You know who I am. I've been told you recognized me months ago. So you know what you know. The things my company has been through. You know what the lawsuit was about." She stopped. "Why are you still coming?" I looked at her for a moment. The gray sky above the parking lot. The bare branches of the elm tree. This woman across the hood of my car in her practical gray coat with an envelope in her pocket that I had refused. "I'm going to tell you something," I said, "and I'd like you to just listen." She was still. I told her about Harold. Not the way I've told you, not with the accumulated texture of 34 years, not with the 9 constellations and the Saturday breakfast and the grocery list that still lived on my refrigerator. I told her the facts, in sequence, in the compressed and specific way you tell something to a person who needs to understand it quickly and clearly. His name, the diagnosis, the name of the medication, the price before her company acquired it, the price after, the month of the increase, the insurance cap, the patient assistance denial, the gap between what we had and what the medication cost, the number of months between the price increase and the date he died. I did not raise my voice. I did not look away from her. I used the same tone I had used for 33 years when I needed a student to understand that something mattered and that I was going to say it once, and I expected it to land. Victoria Whitmore stood on the passenger side of my car and she listened. Her face was very still in the way that faces are. Still, when the person wearing them is processing something significant and has enough self-control not to show the processing. But there was a moment I saw it, midway through, when I said Harold's name the second time when something moved in her expression. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. The particular shift of a person who has been living with an abstraction and has just been handed a specific human being to attach it to. When I finished, the parking lot was quiet. A car went past on the road behind the building. A gust of wind moved through the elm tree branches above us. Victoria Whitmore said, "I'm sorry for your loss." 4 words. The sentence that exists for situations where language has reached its limit. Said by 1,000 people at a funeral. Said in condolence cards and phone calls and the awkward doorstep moments of bereavement, almost always inadequate and almost always sincere. She said it the same way. I said, "Thank you," because it was the correct response, and because she meant it, and because thank you, and it is insufficient, and I believe you can all be true at the same time, and I am old enough to know that. She nodded once. She put her hand into her pocket, briefly, on the envelope side, not taking it out again, just touching it. Then she turned and walked to her own car, which was parked 2 spaces away. She got in. She sat there for a moment without starting the engine. Then she started it and drove out of the lot and onto Poplar Avenue and was gone. I stood beside my car for a while. I thought, that's it then. She found me, she thanked me, I told her about Harold, she said the inadequate true thing, she left. That is how it ends. I was not devastated by this conclusion. I had not expected the conversation to produce more than it did. A woman like Victoria Whitmore, a woman who had spent a career making decisions at the level where individual names do not reach, was not going to be transformed by a 10-minute conversation in a parking lot in November. That was not how people changed. People changed slowly and partially, and not always in the direction you were hoping, and requiring transformation from someone as the condition of your own generosity was just expectation dressed up as principle. I had not expected transformation. I had given her Harold's name. That was what I had to give. I drove home. I made coffee the first pot, the morning one, even though it was nearly noon. I carried it to the kitchen table, and I stood there for a moment. Harold's usual chair was the one on the right side, facing the window. I had been sitting in the chair across from it, mine, always mine, for 34 years since the week after the funeral. I had not sat in his chair. I had moved around it, the same way I moved around the blue mug at the back of the cabinet and the stopwatch in the desk drawer. I pulled out Harold's chair. I sat in it. The angle of the room was different from this side, the window on the left instead of straight ahead, the refrigerator visible, his grocery list in my handwriting on the door. I drank my coffee. The room felt different from this chair. Not wrong, just different. The way anything is different when you've only ever seen it from one angle, and then you move. I sat there for a long time. 3 days later, on a Friday morning, my phone rang. The number on the screen was not one I recognized, a Chicago area code. Not Memphis, not Atlanta where Marcus was. I looked at it through 2 full rings. I have a rule about unfamiliar numbers. I do not answer them because in my experience, unfamiliar numbers at my age are either medical billing or solicitation, and I have no patience for either. I answered it on the 3rd ring. I am not entirely sure why. Some instinct. Some sense that the particular timing of this call 3 days after that parking lot, that conversation, that inadequate true sentence was not accidental. "Mrs. Beaumont," said the voice on the other end. I recognized it immediately, the controlled register of it, the slight compression, as if each word is being chosen from a narrower field than usual. Yes, I said. A pause. Not a long one. This is Victoria Whitmore. I need to tell you something, and I want to say it before I do anything else so you hear it first. I don't expect anything from you. Not forgiveness, not a response, not any continuation of this conversation after I've said what I called to say. I sat in Harold's chair and I held the phone and I listened. What I noticed first was not what she said, but what was missing from her voice. Victoria Whitmore on the phone was different from Victoria Whitmore in the waiting room, and different again from the woman who had stood on the passenger side of my car 3 days before. The waiting room version was managed, contained, occupying space with the assurance of someone accustomed to being the most important person in whatever room she entered. The parking lot version had been careful, prepared, operating from a script she had written and was now delivering. But this voice, on a Friday morning, calling from a Chicago number I had not saved, had none of that architecture in it. It was just a voice, a tired one. I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anyone, she said. Not my board, not my attorney, not my ex-husband, no one. I said nothing. I sat in Harold's chair at the kitchen table with one hand around my coffee cup and the other holding the phone, and I let her proceed at the pace she needed. The day we voted on the Hemovax pricing, she said, I drove from the board meeting directly to the hospital. Not my office, the hospital. Lily had had a bad morning. Her counts had dropped overnight, and the pediatric team called me at 8, and I'd told them I'd come after the meeting, so I went. She paused. Something in the pause that was not hesitation, but was the sound of someone finding the next sentence in terrain they had not mapped before. I parked in the structure on the west side of the building, level 3. I sat in the car for probably 15 minutes before I went up. And while I was sitting there, I remember thinking very specifically, I remember this, that somewhere in that city, there was probably someone who had the treatment Lily needed. The right blood match, the right tissue match, some kind of biological coincidence that could help her, and that I was going to go inside and do everything I could to find that person and get Lily what she needed. I thought that. Another pause. And then I went upstairs, and I sat with Lily for an hour. And then I went back to my office, and I signed the final authorization on the Hemovax pricing structure. That same afternoon, the same day I had sat in that parking structure thinking about strangers who might be able to help my daughter. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the November light was doing what November light does, pale, low, apologetic. The grocery list on the refrigerator was visible from Harold's chair, my handwriting curved in the cursive that my students used to call old-fashioned. I knew, Victoria said. That's what I need to say clearly. I knew the pricing would make the medication inaccessible for a significant number of patients. I had the data. My CFO had presented it. Ellison had argued against it. I overruled him because the margin calculation supported the structure, and because I told myself that the assistance program would catch the people who fell through, and I believed that, or I told myself I believed it, and I signed it anyway. She stopped. I knew what I was doing would hurt people, she said. I just never thought I would have to see them. The silence that followed was the longest moment of that phone call. On my end of it, I was sitting in Harold's chair with my coffee going cold, and 34 years of memory in the walls around me. And on her end of it, she was wherever she was, Chicago, most likely, the city I had only visited twice and did not know, sitting with what she had just said out loud for the first time. I did not respond immediately. I sat with the silence the same way I had learned to sit with all the other silences of the last 3 years, not filling them, not rushing past them, letting them be the size they needed to be. Then I said the only thing I could think of to say. I am going to tell you what that was. But not yet, because what came after it matters first. The press conference was on a Thursday morning, 8 days after the phone call. I found out about it the way I find out about most things that happen in the business world, through the Memphis commercial appeal, which I still receive in print because I am 67 years old and I subscribe to a newspaper the way some people subscribe to a faith, not because it is efficient, but because the physical act of reading it is part of how I move through a morning. The article was on the front page of the business section. Whitmore Pharmaceuticals CEO announces major policy shift, names patient access fund. I read the headline twice. Then I read the article. Victoria had held the press conference at Whitmore's Chicago headquarters. She had stood at a podium and read from prepared remarks, and then answered questions for 35 minutes, which the reporter described as unusually long for a corporate announcement of this kind. The things she announced, in the order she announced them, the price of Hemavax was being reduced to $600 per month, effective within 60 days. A patient assistance program redesigned from the previous one, with different income thresholds and a cap on out-of-pocket costs, would bring monthly costs to $50 or less for any patient meeting the qualifying criteria. The program would be retroactive to the date of the original price increase for patients who could document the gap in coverage. The company was establishing a patient access endowment of $30 million. The fund would be managed by an independent board and would be available to patients across all therapeutic areas where Whitmore held pharmaceutical rights. The fund was being named the Harold Beaumont Patient Access Fund. I read that line 3 times. A new company policy, drafted by a working group that included, by name, board member Ellison Greer, would govern all future drug acquisitions, requiring an independent affordability assessment and a mandatory patient assistance framework before any price structure could be finalized. The policy was being adopted effective immediately. Victoria Whitmore was to be staffed by individuals with direct personal experience of serious illness and the healthcare system as patients or caregivers. She was not stepping down. She was stepping into something different. She did not mention Lily. She did not mention me. She did not mention a parking lot, or a phone call, or a Tuesday morning habit, or a woman who had been rolling up her sleeve every month for 18 months without announcing herself. Some things do not require a press release. Some things are better held the way certain objects are held, not displayed, just kept, in the drawer where the important things go. I folded the newspaper. I put my hands flat on the table. I sat there for a moment, in Harold's chair, looking at the refrigerator door. My phone rang 40 minutes later. Marcus, Mama. His voice had the quality it got when he was trying to understand something and was not yet sure he had all the pieces. Are you watching the news? I read the paper, I said. The fund. The Harold Beaumont. He stopped. Started again. Mama, is this connected to you? Tell me what's happening. I thought about how to answer that. I have never been a woman who tells her son everything, not because I don't trust him, but because some things belong to the person who lived them before they belong to anyone else. And the person who has to live inside a story needs to understand it herself before she hands it to someone she loves. Yes, I said. It's connected to me. It's a long story, and I'll tell you all of it, but not on the phone. A pause. Come home for Thanksgiving, I said. Both of you. He said he would. He asked if I was okay. And I told him I was. And that was true in the way that things are true when they are still being figured out. Not the finished truth, but the working version, the one you live inside, while the rest of it becomes clear. We said goodbye. I set the phone on the table. I looked at the folded newspaper. The Harold Beaumont Patient Access Fund. In the first year, I would later learn, it covered 4,216 patients across 22 states. I have that number written on a notepad in the desk drawer, next to the stopwatch. I look at it sometimes. Not every day. When I need to. I sat in Harold's chair for a long time that Thursday morning. With the pale November light coming through the window, and the newspaper on the table in front of me, and the refrigerator across the room with its list in my handwriting and the cup of coffee I had let go cold an hour ago, and I thought about the phone call 8 days before, about what Victoria had said, about the silence that followed it, and about the thing I said into that silence. I have been carrying it since. I am going to tell you what it was. Harold used to say it at the end of a long week, sometimes at the dinner table with his hands folded, sometimes in the car on the way home from something that had worn him out. Not as a lecture, Harold was not a lecturing man. More as an observation he was returning to, the way you return to a page in a book you've already read, because the sentence still has something to give you. You don't do good things because the other person deserves them. You do good things because you deserve to be someone who does good things. That is what I said to Victoria Whitmore on the phone. Into the silence that came after her admission, after she told me she had known, on the day of the board meeting, that the pricing would reach people the way it eventually reached Harold, and had signed the authorization anyway, I said those words. Harold's words, in Harold's order, with Harold's timing, which I have been practicing for 20 years. There was a longer silence after that. Then Victoria said, yes, just that, one word. The particular yes that is not agreement but recognition. The yes of someone who has just heard a thing named that they have been unable to name themselves. She said, is that what you told yourself when you kept coming? I said, that's what I told myself the second time. After that, it didn't require telling. It was just what I did. We were quiet for another moment. Thank you, she said. Differently than in the parking lot. Not the structured gratitude of someone completing a transaction. The other kind. The kind that has no agenda and requires nothing back. You're welcome, I said. We said goodbye. I set the phone on the table, and I sat in Harold's chair, and I looked at the room from that angle, the refrigerator, the window, the pale November light coming through, the cup of coffee in front of me, and I thought, he would have liked the way this ended up, not because justice had been served in any clean or complete sense, but because something real had been said out loud by someone who needed to say it, and because the saying of it had cost something, and Harold believed that things which cost something were the things worth doing. Lily's AIHA went into remission the following spring. The experimental treatment worked. Her doctor, the same one who had been pushing the insurance approval through the particular machinery of large medical decisions, called it a sustained response, which in the language of pediatric hematology means the body has found its way back to something manageable, though you do not use the word cured because the word requires a certainty that medicine is honest enough not to claim. She was 9 by then. Her hair had come back fully, the same dark color it had been before. And from what Priya told me carefully, within the limits of what she was permitted to share, which was not much, the girl had filled 3 sketchbooks during the treatment months and had started a 4th. I do not know Lily Whitmore. I have seen her twice in a waiting room, once from across a lobby. She has smiled at me once, and I smiled back, and did not trust my voice. That is the extent of our acquaintance. It is also the full extent of what I needed it to be. Marcus came home for Thanksgiving. He brought the woman he had been seeing for 8 months. Her name is Renata. She teaches mathematics at Georgia Tech, and she has the particular quality of a person who listens to understand rather than to respond, which is the quality I have always believed matters most in a human being. I made the dinner I always make, which has not changed in 30 years except for minor adjustments in the herb quantities. They sat at the dining table. Marcus, without making a decision about it that I could see, sat in Harold's chair. Not my chair, his father's. He reached for the bread basket from that side of the table, and he passed it to Renata, and he settled into that seat. The way you settle into something familiar, which told me he had been sitting in his father's chair in his own memory for a long time, and was glad to sit in it in the actual room. I watched this from the kitchen doorway for a moment before I brought out the food. Then I went in, and we ate. After dinner, when Renata was in the other room, and Marcus was helping me with the dishes, not because it was his job, he had appointed himself to the task, the way Harold used, to appoint himself to things he saw needed doing. He asked me to tell him everything. So I did. Standing at the kitchen sink, passing him wet dishes to dry, I told him from the beginning. He listened the way he has always listened. Completely, without interrupting, asking one question only when I had finished, which was, "Are you all right, Mama?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Good." Then I'm all right too. He dried the last dish and put it away in the cabinet where it belonged. We went and sat with Renata in the other room. The evening was ordinary in all the ways I had been hoping for, which is to say, it was just people in a house being together, which is the thing I had been missing more than anything specific since Harold left. I want to tell you what I have not yet told you, which is what 18 months of knowing changed in me. Not what it changed for Victoria. Not what it changed for Lily. What it did to me, which is the only part I have full knowledge of, and the only part that belongs to me to report. I had every right to stop going. I want to be clear about that once more, because I think sometimes when people tell stories like this one, they sand the edges off the difficulty to make the choice seem more natural than it was. The choice was not natural. Some months, it was very difficult. Some months, I sat in the parking lot and thought about Harold's insurance statements and the patient assistance letter with its 4 unfortunatelys, and I asked myself what exactly I thought I was doing. And the answer was not always immediately available. What I can tell you is that every month I went in, something in me stayed intact that might otherwise have eroded. I do not have a more precise word for it than integrity, which is an old word and a plain one, and which I have always preferred to the more elaborate alternatives. The giving kept the giver whole, not healed. I am not going to use that word because grief is not a wound with a scar on the other side of it. Grief is a permanent rearrangement of the interior, and I have made my peace with that. But whole, present, still the person Harold had known for 34 years, even in the years he was not here to confirm it. As for forgiving Victoria Whitmore, I am not going to tell you I have done it completely, because I don't think that would be true, and I have never seen any use in telling a convenient version of the truth. I am still working on it. Some days I am closer than others. What I can tell you is that I am doing it gradually, in the imperfect, incremental way that real forgiveness actually works, without a ceremony and without a finish line. I think Harold would consider that sufficient. Harold was always reasonable about what was possible. In the spring, after that Thanksgiving, I added a rose bush to the garden. Harold never grew roses. He said they required a patience he respected in theory, but could not sustain in practice. Roses want particular soil conditions and specific pruning schedules, and they will not produce if you treat them the way you treat the more forgiving plants. He said once, in a tone that was more admiring than complaining, "Roses hold you to a standard, Claude. Either you do the work or they show you." I bought a climbing rose, pale yellow, and planted it along the south fence where the volunteer tomatoes had come up 2 springs before. It did not bloom the first year. The second year, it gave me 3 blooms in May and then went quiet again for the summer. I did the work. I learned what I was doing by doing it. Harold had been right, that patience was required. I had not known, until I tried, that I had it. Let me tell you how it is now. It is the 2nd Tuesday of November. I have parked in the spot near the elm tree, which has been bare for a month, but still holds one last leaf on the highest branch, rust-colored and dry, hanging on without apparent reason. I have pushed through the front door of the Memphis Community Blood Center. Priya has smiled at me from behind the desk, the way she has smiled at me for more than 2 years now, and she has already set aside the peanut butter cookie. I sit in the donation chair. Priya ties the rubber band around my arm and finds the vein without effort. She knows it by now, the same way she knows my parking spot and my cookie and the fact that I always read the newspaper back to front. My blood moves into the bag. Dark, warm, the same as always. Where it goes from here, I do not know precisely. Lily no longer needs it. Her transfusions ended in April. It goes somewhere else, to someone I will not meet, for a reason I will not be told. The system is what it has always been. Anonymous, efficient, necessary. I eat my cookie. I drink my juice. I read about Shelby County road closures and a high school football team in Germantown that has won 9 games this season and a new library branch opening in Whitehaven in the spring. 15 minutes pass. They always do. When I stand up and put on my coat, I look out the window. The elm tree is still there. The last leaf is still on the branch. I watch it for a moment. It moves slightly in whatever wind exists outside, adjusting without letting go, holding the position it has held through October and into November, without making any announcement about the difficulty of it. I am not in a hurry. Before I go, and I mean this as a real question, not a formality, I want to ask you something. Have you ever done something good for someone who did not deserve it? Have you ever stood at the moment where you could choose generosity or choose anger and chosen the harder one? Not because anyone would know, not because the outcome was guaranteed, just because you decided that was who you needed to be. Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you know someone in your life who gives without keeping score, who shows up without being asked, who does the right thing in rooms where no one is watching, share this with them today. Because people like that deserve to know their work is seen. Harold used to say that blood is the one thing in this life that cannot be bought, only given. He was right. But I have come to understand that the same is true of the kind of giving that costs you something real, not just the blood in your arm, but the choice to extend it towards someone connected to your own loss. That kind of giving is not convenient. It is not painless. It does not come with a guarantee of return. It comes with something better than a guarantee. It comes with the knowledge of who you are, when no one is requiring anything of you. I know who I am. Harold knew it first. I am still catching up. I'll see you in the next story. Claudine had every right to stop, but she kept giving, not for Victoria, not for Lily, for herself, for the person Harold loved, for the integrity that grief couldn't touch. We walk past people every day who are giving everything quietly, no recognition, no reward. And sometimes the person we're giving to is connected to our deepest pain. The choice to give anyway, that's not weakness. That's the most powerful thing a human being can do. Don't give because they deserve it. Give because you deserve to be someone who gives.